Welcome to the Global Discussion with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins today. Real pleasure to be joined by Gemma Allen. Gemma, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin by maybe talking a little bit about some of the work that you're involved in from a writing perspective, because a lot of our people watching and listening to this episode, a lot of our community will be very familiar with brands like Nasdaq and very familiar with brands like Forbes. So maybe could we start there a little bit? Maybe tell us a little bit about the work that you do there and how you got into that.
Yeah, no, and listen, thanks so much for having me on. I guess in some respects, I kind of like to say, or I tell people I'm a bit of an accidental writer. I really, up until really the pandemic, I only wrote Facebook posts, and my mother was my main follower. So I can't say I have any sort of journalistic background or anything, but I always loved to write. English was my favorite subject in school, and I have a humanities degree, but never, I think looking back, had the confidence to write when I was like in my early 20s. But during the pandemic, I really just had a kind of fortuitous opportunity in that I was on a panel, speaking a virtual panel, speaking about remote working, and I had a pandemic baby and a toddler. So I had a very stressful pandemic period, I guess, really. And I also lost my mother at the very beginning. And it was just like kind of a stressful couple of months. And I think in some respects, gave me the courage to like find my voice on a couple of things. And after that panel discussion, somebody approached me from an outlet and asked me if I was interested in writing something about female imposter syndrome, particularly as it relates to postpartum women. And that was really the start of it. I wrote a piece, shared it, like obviously, it was shared through the outlet. And then at the time I was in the Irish government investment agency in New York. I'd been there, I guess, like 5 years at that stage, and spoke to our PR agency just about the fact that I really enjoyed writing. There hadn't been a whole lot of female writers, I guess, from the perspective of, well, there's not a whole lot of female writers in the tech space, full stop, but also within our own agency at the time. And he was just all for it. And then together we approached a couple of outlets, did some really what I call like guest ads for Nasdaq. So wrote bylines, which are just kind of one-off pieces on topics. And the editor of Nasdaq said, "Oh, this work," I think the term he used was pretty turnkey, and that it was easy for him to, read it and publish it quite quickly. And he was like, "Oh, if you want to become a contributor, we could make that happen." And that was like honestly a bit of a shock. My uncles in Ireland, you're saying most people have heard about Nasdaq, but my uncles thought I was writing for NASCAR, the the racing car entity, and they were like, "What does she know about racing cars?" So not everybody knows of Nasdaq, but I guess here in the US and most people in the kind of corporate world do. But it was a kind of a shock to me at the time that it happened the way it did. And then, like anything, the more you do anything and the more you start to grow confidence in a space, the more other opportunities come your way. So in the 2 odd years, so I had been writing for Nasdaq, I was invited to different events and got to meet really cool people and met the editor of Forbes magazine at a technology event, had a chat, kind of stewed on that chat for about 6 months, and then sent her like a very bold email saying, "Hey, I know we had that like conversation, but actually I'd love the opportunity to do some guest writing for Forbes." And I again was just pitching this one-off opportunity. And she was like really reciprocative, really kind, like really, I think, again, like a great advocate for women and young women and like, breaking kind of new ground in new spaces, and allowed me to enter the contributor process for Forbes, like nominated me. And through that, I became a writer for Forbes Women, or a freelance contributor for Forbes Women. So it's been an accidental but very like rewarding journey. And I think, above all, it's just been a relearning for me in that you just need to grab things by the balls sometimes and have the courage to do things and step outside of your comfort zone. So,
Well, you certainly are making waves, whether it's Forbes Women or Forbes around the world, because you've been writing some very interesting pieces there for Forbes. And it's great to see that, because you mentioned IDA a little while ago, and that sort of Irish government, Irish sort of investment around the world, and how that it attracts direct investment back into Ireland. But obviously with your expertise spreading across, 2, if not 3 continents at this stage, you've got an awful lot that you can contribute to there. But I want to turn, if I can, my next question to a recent article that you wrote for Nasdaq. So not the car racing, not the but the financial markets, as it were. Nasdaq being a very well-respected stock market, literally internationally, extremely well known with the tech sector, obviously. But you wrote a very interesting piece recently about AI, and everybody's talking about AI at the moment. But it was really how you sort of wove the story in about female investors, female investment, and this lack of diversity, this lack of equity. You also touched on topics around how there was a lack of confidence from maybe a female side of things when investing. And also we see quite shocking and staggering statistics with the lack of investment into female founders in comparison. And I was just maybe wondering if you could maybe share a few thoughts on that. I know it was sort of hinged around the world billionaire list, which we did see that climbing a little bit in terms of women featuring on that, but it's nowhere near at parity, right? We're miles off.
Oh my God, absolutely. So AI, first of all, is just such a hype, like a fascinating space, but such a hyped space, I think, right now. And, you mentioned I was at IDA for 9 years. Before that, I was actually at Microsoft for 8 years. So, and I was a young woman who actually had a social science degree and had been working, or had plans or was training to become a social worker when I kind of pivoted and ended up at Microsoft. And, for me, I suppose the technology space and, the kind of hype that goes with technology, obviously it's exciting and it's good, and commercially it drives a lot of revenue in all sorts of directions. But I think for people who are like maybe on the peripheral of that, or minorities or women, sometimes that hype can create like a feeling of inertia. And I, somebody who had no technical background but ended up working at Microsoft and working on very technical projects and like on a client-facing role as well for 8 years, feel like, that technology is an area that you can absolutely learn, and maybe not to be like a front-end coder. I'm not saying people can, learn that like off the bat or even just through like observed learning. But I think that technology space is so much faceted that there's room for everyone. So with the emergence of AI, I would be very concerned that a lot of this hype around AI and this dystopian view of like, the Terminator movies coming to life could actually be a detractor for women getting into the technology industry at a time when women have never been needed more. And AI really makes technology and work cases for technology projects and, examples very user-friendly in a lot of ways. It has a usability factor that no technology has ever had historically, right? Like it creates a whole new kind of face to the tech industry in some respects. That's not to say that I'm a massive advocate for AI. I have a lot of concerns about, the ethics and the governance. And really my main concern about AI is the representation, in the kind of development of these products, and the lack of, not just women, but like minorities, like cultural minorities, black people across the board, Hispanic people here in the US, like every kind of, person of color. I think really there needs to be a massive focus on making sure that they are represented too in the development of what is essentially could be and likely will be the most consequential technology of our time. So when it comes to finance, I had actually just randomly went to a couple of classes this year to learn how to play poker. And again, targeting at women, through kind of some women I met through the Forbes network, and this idea of like game theory as a philosophy or precedent to help women understand and be a little bit more forthcoming and more self-advocacy. And honestly, I suppose, Simon, turn them into better bluffers, right? Which we know women aren't for the most part. And you need to be a little bit of a bluffer to make it in corporate America. So at this event, met this lady who has this very successful empire, the financial feminist Tory, and got chatting to her about, investing. And she has created, like, she's a 30-year-old woman who has created a whole content empire around teaching women how to invest. So when I started looking at Tori's work and looking at, the, again, alarming statistics on just who makes the decisions in households, and I'll be honest, including my own, like, any stock I ever had at Microsoft, once I got in a relationship that then became my marriage, I kind of let him manage that, right? Like that, even up until that very moment where I'm sitting there playing cards, I'm like a woman who's all about women. And, like some people would joke, or I would joke, even a bit of a bra burner, but my husband is managing my future financially, right? So I thought, wow, am I alone? And then I spoke to a couple of people, started reading online, and I was like, Jesus Christ, women are not investing in this space. And access to capital from like the perspective of entrepreneurship, job opportunities, freedom, even just being able to make your own bloody decisions, it's so important. So her points and the points around, helping women learn to invest, I think is so crucial, especially if you've even the smallest amount of disposable income on a monthly basis. And it can be such a small amount too, which I was really fascinated by when you watch the numbers in terms of how that grows. And I think a lot of these AI tools, from what I've read and even played around with myself, are actually very useful. So I really do believe that they could demystify some, if not, a solid chunk of this kind of what has been seen a very, stiff, technical, almost sometimes academic type space, and make it more available to everybody. And I think, if women and if people the world over of all class and all gender could learn how to be better investors and be better at financial management and financial planning with the smaller, large amounts of money they have, that would make for just a fairer society. So again, I do feel AI can add to that, or can at least help, create a path forward in that space.
I love that. I'm a big proponent of AI for good. So I love AI for good, and I think that's perfectly well said. And I just referring back to that article, and people can go to nasdaq.com and read it, but you make reference to the fact that the challenge is twofold. You make a point that female-founded businesses get, I think, I don't know, it's 2% or just slightly less than 2% of all the venture capital.
That is less than 2%, and that is a decreasing figure, which is absolutely terrifying. Like,
staggering.
Like last year, like for an example, like this statistic really pissed me off in particular. Last year, Adam Newman, in his comeback, Adam Newman, the founder of WeWork, the infamous Adam Newman, the ultimate technocrat, he raised more money in his return, to American greatness, I suppose, or the kind of Silicon Valley greatness, with his latest venture startup, to SVB, which again was, or to SoftBank, I'm sorry, through, again, I'm going to mispronounce this guy's name, but through his main, what I like to call his fairy godfather at SoftBank, then, the majority of female entrepreneurs did combined, right? Like in most major cities in the US. So like the bias and the, discrepancy is so blatant. Like it can't but be ignored. Like it can't be denied actually, but it can be ignored because it has been ignored for, a significant amount of time now.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you make a great point that a lot of women, a lot of female, whether they're founders or not, maybe have less passive income. They're less active in the stock market. And I think what you were talking about earlier, where AI becomes this almost learning tool, that it can help them on that sort of road to self-wealth creation, right? Any tool that we can use to help level up the amount of investment, the amount of income, the amount of understanding and knowledge, I think is probably a good thing. So more AI for good type measures. But it is a great article, and I wanted to raise it here. So thanks for sharing it. Before we run out of time, though, there is another network that you're involved in. We're talking about empowering women a little bit. And the Chief Network, people may have seen that popping up online or in their LinkedIn feed or places like that. And I know you've been involved there a little bit. Could you tell us a little bit about the Chief Network and what it aims to do and why you're involved?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I am a member of Chief since 2021, maybe 2020. Back when it was kind of in its infancy. And at the time, I joined Chief because it had a flagship co-working space here in New York. I've always been a very social, like, extroverted person. I like going to bars and chatting to randomers, and I loved the idea of kind of a female club, if you like, where women are like meeting, to network and to like chat to each other. But Chief actually, for me, became, I suppose, a lot more than that because the real, ethos behind Chief is women supporting women, which again sounds very cliche. But the challenge is that it has been a cliche and a soundbite for a long time with very little tactical, execution of what that can mean or how that can play out. So Chief, well, it's a number of things. It's a forum, it's a way to kind of engage with people in your specific industry or focus and, come together at events and come together and meet like, in kind of an organized format to discuss topics and to network and to look at potential career opportunities, etc. But it's also a great opportunity for peer advisory, which is like peer-to-peer coaching and mentorship, which I have found really, really useful for me personally, because, well, I think I found it useful on two levels. Like one as a woman, because, again, in the like last, I suppose in the 18 years or so, or maybe 16 years I was in the workforce before I joined Chief, I worked a lot with men, like, especially in the technology sector. Men just happen to be, the majority human in most rooms. So, I definitely felt like that kind of access to women and especially, senior women was a little bit lacking within my own career and network. And then also as an Irish woman, I thought that in New York, which is, a very interesting place and position to be in, because I think culturally, Irish people, not just women, have been raised with this like forced humility at all times that doesn't necessarily exist here in the US. It's a very different bullish culture, Like when I was at Microsoft, we would do these like icebreakers on global teams, and people would be asked questions that are, a little bit awkward to get things going. And, some people would be jumping off the seat, to kind of talk to their, or to share their story. And a lot of Irish people be hiding under the seat, it's just kind of the cultural nuances, I suppose, of where we grew up. So I felt like in New York, I was like, God, I feel like I have a lot to learn about how to be, like I said earlier, like a bit more of maybe a bragger. Not that, I don't want to like insult anyone, but I just think people are maybe more natural self-advocacy here in the US. I think they're like, I have a 4-year-old who just recently did a presentation in school about her stuffy, and in practicing for us said to us, I'm now ready for questions and comments. Like she's talking about a teddy bear, like that. I didn't have that at 4 years of age in a Catholic deaf school in Cork City, so I think thankfully maybe that's changing. But so for me, Chief was kind of twofold. It was an opportunity to network and engage with like really interesting women in spaces that I'm also really interested in. They have a lane, if you like, for everything, for all sorts of industry focus areas, but also as an opportunity maybe to become, or to try and, integrate my own mindset into the American culture a little bit more, with less, again, like I said earlier, inertia, or to feel less intimidated by, just some of the things that play out in your mind when you're in these situations.
Thanks for sharing that, Gemma. It's very helpful to know. And I think that Chief Network, they sort of designed it with sort of women in mind, but particularly executive women. I know they've got about 10,000 companies that they represent, or at least they have a C-level type person or a senior person within about 10,000 companies. And that's everybody from IBM to Microsoft to Sony to Salesforce to, I mean, you name the big
Yeah.
brand.
Oh, yeah. It's
There are people in there.
exploded.
Yeah, it
Like
really
it
is
certainly
big.
has. Yeah. And I mean, it's not cheap, it's not a cheap fee. I think a lot of companies have been funding or supporting their female staff to become members of Chief as part of their own L&D programs or their own, career development strategies, which again, I think is a really great move, and, to allow, and a transparent move too, right? Because, you're obviously, you have these women who you really believe in, and you're giving them an opportunity to access a big bad world, which is far from just your own kind of, company's brand and doorstep. But I think that kind of reciprocal belief is really important. So yeah, so I've met some great women, had some great nights out. You know, I've
You
like, you know,
highly
I've had some,
recommend the Chief Network then, by the sound of
yeah,
things.
if you know, if it's something that you're, you know, if as a woman it's something that you can afford and that, or that your company, you know, can help support, then I really do recommend it, because I think there's ways, I guess what I'm kind of alluding to there is, like, I think there are ways that you can also network and, you know, access women and and even just, you know, become, you know, part of kind of a movement without necessarily paying a membership fee, because I know that's a challenge for everybody, right? And there's so I guess I wouldn't want, like, to kind of give the message that it's the only path, but I think it's a very helpful path. And I think, but I do think as women we could probably just be better at making, you know, this easier on each other too.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, thanks, Gemma. Look, before we run out of time, I want to ask you two quick questions. Number one is there anything else that you'd like to share with our worldwide audience while we're together with them here today? And secondly, if people want to reach out and connect with you, of course, they can go over to Forbes and read your columns and your articles. And of course, they can go over to nasdaq.com and check you out. But is it best to connect with you on LinkedIn or you know, via the Chief Network? Or how do people get in touch with you these days?
Yeah, like, absolutely. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I've been really behind on the social side of my writing journey. And I actually do plan this in the next kind of month or so to create a public facing social media for my writing and for my pieces. So, you know, I'm kind of, that's a work in traction. I love the work. I'm less good at the advertising. So I love the writing and researching. So I plan to do that, but for now, I guess LinkedIn, I have an X account. I don't use it all too often. Again, I should be better at that. I use it sometimes for research, and that can be kind of alarming in many respects. But yeah, and in terms of, like, my message to, you know, to the world, I suppose, really, or to people, to listeners, you know, to any kind of young people listening to this, or especially to young women, I would just say, like, you know, be courageous, believe in it. My mother used to say to me, if you don't believe in yourself, nobody will. So I think that's, and honestly, you know, that's very true. So yeah, just take a risk.
Perfect. I like that. Believe in yourself, take a risk. That's a great point to end on. So thanks to everybody who's been watching or listening to our discussion today with myself and Gemma. Thanks very much for spending some time with us. Make sure that you follow, like, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support the show. Go and check out all the great writing that Gemma's involved in and everything else. Connect with her on LinkedIn. And I hope that you'll join me back here on the show for some more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers just like Gemma. But thank you, Gemma. It's been a real
Thanks so
pleasure to
much.
talk to you today.
Thank you.